So how should India react? How do we navigate the shifting tides of power and security in an uncertain world? From grand strategy to military technology, from power and conflict to the unseen forces shaping our world, and from battlefields to the halls of power. We decode the past, analyze the present, and anticipate the future of global security. I am Sandeep Unnithan, and this is the National Security Agenda. Mohammad Yunus is chief advisor to the government of Bangladesh. He advises an interim government that took over when Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina left the country in August last year. But in the last 7 months, this chief advisor has been behaving as the chief executive, an unelected chief executive taking decisions of huge consequence. This is power without electoral accountability. And Bangladesh, a democracy, is in the grip of what can only be called a Unarchy. The chief advisor, Yunus, hasn't decided on a date for elections because that would end his Unarchy. He meanwhile continues to make geopolitical decisions. The newest episode of this Unarchy, a statement made during a 4-day visit to Beijing where Mohammad Yunus asked for a Bangladeshi equivalent of a China-Pakistan economic corridor. He mentioned India's vulnerabilities. Let's listen into his statement.
Eastern part of India, called Seven Sisters. They are landlocked country, landlocked region of India. They have no way to reach out to the ocean. We are the only guardian of the ocean for all this region. So this opens up a huge possibility. So this could be an extension of the Chinese economy. Build things, produce things, market things, bring things to Nepal, China, bring it out to the whole rest of the world. That's the production house for you. So that's the opportunity we should seize and we should implement, we should get it done. Nepal has unlimited hydropower, which is a blessing. Bhutan has unlimited hydropower. That's a blessing. We can bring it to our purpose, to our setting up our factories and so on. And from Bangladesh, you can go anywhere you want because the ocean is in our backyard.
Joining me now are Vice Admiral Anil Kumar Chawla, former CINC of the Southern Naval Command, and Lieutenant General Pradeep Nair, former Director General Assam Rifles. He joins us incidentally from landlocked Arunachal Pradesh. Welcome to the National Security Agenda.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Sandeep back here.
General Nair, I want to start by asking, this is Bangladesh's chief executive mentioning landlocked Indian states. He's called them the Seven Sisters. So Bangladesh has no landward access to China, but the Chinese are sitting in the Chumbi Valley a few kilometers away. And is he signaling that the Chinese should cross the Siliguri corridor and link up with Bangladesh? This is playing on our fears of this corridor, this very, very strategic Siliguri corridor being overrun by the Chinese. This has been there on the Indian Army's mind for a long time. Is Mohammad Yunus playing up that sentiment again?
Sandeep, firstly, thank you for having me over for this particular edition of yours. Coming back to the question that you asked, to begin with, there is no legitimacy, as you rightly said in your opening remarks. He has no legitimacy to take decisions the kind of which he's been taking. But more importantly, I think he has no business to be mentioning about Northeast. It's neither correct diplomatically, nor is it appropriate for two countries which have been friendly for years. Coming back to the statement that he's made, nobody really takes him seriously. Now, I look at it in a manner that he's trying to establish some kind of legitimacy. The purpose for which he was positioned in power was essentially to create circumstances to form a new government, for which he asked, well, I'm going to undertake certain reforms, electoral reforms, political reforms, economic reforms, military reforms, you name it, and all of that he wanted to do. What is the support that he has today? When he started out, he had the huge support of political parties other than the Awami League. But today, the BNP, the other parties that are there, are all asking for some kind of a, assurance from him for an election date, which he is still not proclaimed, though there are feelers where the army has told him to have it within the next 6 months. Now, in all of this, he is trying to kind of divert the attention by making such statements, proclamations, and he, I think, will continue to do so. But in the long run, it doesn't work well for him at all. Increasingly, the support for him is reducing. He's playing to the gallery, and here the gallery is actually the Jamaat.
Right.
And the Jamaat Pak connections are well known. He's trying to establish that Jamaat Pak China connect. So no matter what he says, he's not going to be taken seriously, and there's really no reason for us to be concerned. And since you mentioned about my presence in Arunachal Pradesh, I've been here for the last 11, 12 days, traveling extensively. I've been in the Northeast for a very long time, but what I've noticed is the huge transformation that is happening in Arunachal Pradesh in terms of our road connectivity, in terms of our reach. There is no reason for us to be concerned in any way, no matter what statements he makes. He can keep saying anything, but things will remain what they are. And I would like to assure everyone, having seen it now so closely, whether it is Arunachal Pradesh or rest of the Northeast, he can say anything, it doesn't affect us, it doesn't affect the Northeast.
Yunus can say what he wants, nothing affects India's position on the ground in Arunachal Pradesh. Thank you, General Nair. I'm going to go over to the maritime aspect of what he said. Mohammad Yunus offered the Chinese an ocean front, literally, and access to the Bay of Bengal. And I'm going to ask Admiral Chawla this. Admiral Chawla, you have a new book out on maritime power and China's grand strategy. Explain to us the significance of the Bay of Bengal to China and why the chief advisor would be offering Bay of Bengal access to China. And where does China literally fit, where does the Bay of Bengal fit into China's grand strategy?
Sandeep, the basic moot point why the Bay of Bengal is important to China is its Kunming province, which is itself landlocked and which is very far away from the sea. So if you recollect way back in 2000 and in 1999, the Kunming Initiative was announced, which was finally converted into the so-called Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar economic corridor, which really never took off because of India's non-acceptance of this corridor and the problems that were there inside Myanmar itself, which is suffering from serious internal unrest. So there is a long history, and essentially it's for Beijing looks upon it as an economic outlet because it's dependent on the Malacca Strait for over 70% of its oil and gas, and overall close to 80% of its trade passes through the Malacca Strait. So it wants to diversify. And that's why it started this entire initiative, and to some extent it has succeeded. It has constructed an oil and gas pipeline from Kyakfu to Kunming, which is operational. It has upgraded Kyakfu port to take in the oil and gas tankers that come in. This happened quite some time back. So that's functioning all right despite the unrest and the pipeline passes through insurgency-ridden areas which are not really under the control of the Myanmar government as such. Similarly with Bangladesh, it saw Bangladesh as possibly the only stable alternative in the Bay of Bengal through which to enhance its agenda. But the problem with Bangladesh, despite Mr. Mohammad Yunus saying that the northeastern states are landlocked, which they are not really. They have a land outlet, a sea outlet through the Indian mainland, which is contiguous to our territory. So there is a land corridor connecting to the sea. So technically, they are not really landlocked. But I would say that Bangladesh itself is locked out of the continent by India.
Right.
And as you know, the majority of its border is with India, and there's a very small sliver of border with Myanmar, which is really hostile, and nothing much happens from there. But if you look at the other way, China's initiatives with Bangladesh are not new. They've been going on for a long time.
Yes.
What has been worrying us is particularly their involvement in maritime infrastructure projects,
Right.
even under the Sheikh Hasina government. I mean, this has continued despite different governments being in power, because Bangladesh uses the China card to obtain more concessions from India, and I suppose that's their national policy.
Of
so
course,
you can't really.
So China helped Bangladesh build a submarine base for over $1 billion in Cox's Bazar. It was inaugurated just
That's
about
right.
2 years back. Ironically named BNS Sheikh Hasina One doesn't know if that name continues, but that tells you about China's intent there in the Bay of Bengal. It's a strategic intent for China. But moving over to SAARC and BIMSTEC, General Nair, in the last decade, India had put SAARC in cold storage because of Pakistan. It encouraged BIMSTEC instead, eastward looking, Bangladesh and the countries around the Bay of Bengal. Do you see BIMSTEC now going into the deep freeze with this recent statement by the chief advisor? There's a BIMSTEC meeting in Bangkok a few days from now. Do you see this statement of his kind of overshadowing that meeting that's due a few days from now?
Well, Sandeep, I don't really think so. Like you said, the BIMSTEC meeting is around the corner, 2nd to 4th of April. Our Prime Minister will be going there. And as you would know, this is the 6th edition that is happening in Thailand. The last one, of course, happened in Sri Lanka. Yes. And coming to the kind of support that he has amongst the BIMSTEC members, I don't think there's anybody who's openly supporting Yunus for whatever he's worth. Surely everyone knows he's just an interim country head who's been kind of para-dropped there with a certain directive or a certain agenda that he has to establish a government, which is what the other countries of BIMSTEC would be looking forward to. And being the kind of person that he is, he would make some more statements also, which should not affect us, and nor will it affect BIMSTEC. And coming to India's contribution to BIMSTEC has been tremendous.
It has been tremendous indeed, and that meeting is going to play out in a couple of days from now. Will be watched with great interest given the statement that was made just on the eve of that. But coming back to the maritime theatre, Admiral Chawla, we've been seeing a lot of Chinese spy ships, snooping around in the Bay of Bengal, in the Andamans. They are almost a persistent presence there now. Given the fact that the Bay of Bengal is so important for India's second strike, our nuclear deterrent is based on the Bay of Bengal, and the patrol areas for our strategic submarines would be the Bay of Bengal. Would you look at China's imprint in the Bay of Bengal with a lot more concern than you would otherwise?
No, absolutely. So this has always been a larger concern for India, and particularly in the maritime side for the Indian Navy. The only helpful part is that China currently doesn't really have a foothold there in terms of a military base, though there were rumors that it would try and obtain this in Myanmar, but I don't think that's going to happen. So currently, as you said, spy ships keep operating, which frankly operate from other countries as well. I mean, the Western countries have also operated these ships and aircraft in the past because of various reasons. One reason, of course, being that's also the area in which our rocket and missile and satellite launching sites are there, and the trajectory is over the Bay of Bengal, and so there would be an interest in tracking them. I think we should not be, while taking cognizance of what China is doing, we should be more interested in developing, and that's what I argued in not exactly in the book, but in many other articles, that we should be more focused on ensuring what we need to do. And we have to firstly acknowledge that China's presence will be perennial in both Bangladesh and Myanmar. It has been so. You can't really replace but what India needs to do is to ensure that it has a competing influence, that it does not allow China's influence to go the way it has gone in Pakistan, for example. So that is number one. We need to be switched on. We need to engage with the players and ensure that Chinese influence is contained, and we have a large amount of cards to play in that, because China is really not geographically contiguous to this area. We are the predominant region. We hold all the economic cards ready. So that is number one. Secondly, of course, we need and secondly, of course, we need to strengthen our maritime and military infrastructure along the east coast and the Andamans, which we are in the process of doing, so that we monitor what is happening there, because the oceans are free for everybody. And we need to ensure that we know what is happening, and I think that is progressing. And of course, as you mentioned, the BIMSTEC is a grouping that we need to, and we have taken it forward in the security domains as well. We need to follow up on that to ensure that ultimately the players remain clutched in, despite the fact that they will have ties with China for economic reasons. That will remain.
Right. India holds the cards in the region, economic, geographic, and it all depends on how we play those cards. Thank you very much, Admiral Chawla, General Pradeep Nair, for joining us. The rise of China presents a challenge to India. It's the first time we have a superpower at our doorstep. Joining me now is Dr. Arzan Tarapore, research scholar at Stanford University's Center for International Cooperation and Security. Dr. Tarapore, welcome to NSA. Dr. Tarapore, Bangladesh's chief advisor Mohammad Yunus was in Beijing recently. You just heard about that. A lot of agreements were signed. There's also an open invitation to China to come into Bangladesh for possibly a Bangladeshi version of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. The principal advisor also mentioned the fact that India's 7 sisters were landlocked. How do you view this?
Thanks very much again for having me on. Look, if it is a Bangladesh version of CPEC, then we should all breathe a sigh of relief because that's not going anywhere. So that would actually be a poisoned chalice for China. And let me also reiterate that China already has access to the Bay of Bengal, right? So this is not something that Bangladesh is just now giving to the Chinese. And this is a long-standing Chinese position. But let me zoom out a little bit. I'm not an expert on Bangladesh politics or what is exactly driving this. It could be the benign interpretation of this it could just be a plea from Bangladesh for greater trade connectivity with China, because China is an economy you cannot ignore, especially when you are living so close to it. So it could just be a matter of trade connectivity. But here's the sort of sharper point that I would draw. And that is that this is what great power competition looks like, right? So when some people in India, for example, celebrated the inauguration of President Trump because he was going to take on the deep state and he was going to withdraw American interference from around the world, this is what that looks like. When the US withdraws from parts of the world and demonstrates that it is not interested in maintaining the same types of activities that it has traditionally maintained around the world, including in South Asia, this is the result. Now, I'm not making this as a normative judgment, but some people have suggested that this is a moment of opportunity for India because India may be able to thrive in the disruption that this realignment of American policy brings. And maybe India will thrive in this disruption. But maybe when you're competing with an economy that is 4 or 5 times larger and a military that is much more capable, and small countries in the region that have the opportunity to engage with China, then this is what that great power competition without active American involvement looks like.
Dr. Tarapore, both India and China have disengaged militarily in Ladakh, and there's talk of a return to pre-2020 level ties, economic ties included. You made the point in a recent editorial that for India to have stable ties with China, it must deter China militarily. You seen anything that suggests that India isn't doing enough to deter China militarily and possibly making the same mistakes that India did in the past?
Now, as far as India's deterrent posture goes, look, building deterrence is not easy. It's not something that, when especially countries like the US talk about restoring deterrence with an airstrike here or there, that's not how deterrence is restored. That's not how deterrence is built. Deterrence is built through a long, arduous, expensive, and complex process of building military capability. Now, India's done a lot of that, especially since 2020, prior to 2020, but especially since the Ladakh crisis began in the summer of 2020. And it's not clear, we don't know what the deterrent picture is. It's the sort of problem in international affairs that you don't know what level of deterrence you have until it is tested. But what we can say is that it certainly did not have deterrence in 2020. It did not have deterrence even during the crisis when there were other additional probes, both in Ladakh and in Arunachal Pradesh. And so I am skeptical that China is deterred, because for all the military reinforcement and upgrades that India has undertaken, which is speedy and significant, China's upgrades and reinforcement are even speedier and even more significant. So, we won't be able to say definitively what the deterrent balance is on the border. But what I would say is 2 points. Number one, you can never have enough deterrence. You can never be sure that you have enough deterrence, and so there is always work to be done. And the second point I would make is that it's not just about the border. China poses challenges to India, and again, not just India. This is not an India problem. China poses problems to countries of the region that are not just on their border. In India's case, it is a multi-theater, multi-domain challenge that India faces. And so therefore, it behooves India to build deterrent capability not only on the LAC, but also in the Indian Ocean. Not only on the ground, but also in the cyber domain, etc., etc.
Tough decisions that India has to make given the fact that we've never faced a simultaneous land and maritime threat. Important points there, Dr. Arzan Tarapore. Thank you for joining us. On the 28th of May 2008, Nepal's 240-year-old Shah dynasty came to an end. The monarchy was abolished without a referendum and Nepal became a secular federal republic. King Gyanendra was forced to accept the decision. And in May 2008, Nepal looked ahead with hopes of stability, democracy, and economic growth. Politicians assured the people that democracy would bring prosperity and effective governance. Instead, Nepal has suffered political instability, economic hardship, and governance failures. Since 2008, the country has had 13 governments and 11 prime ministers, none of them completing a full term. Political parties remain plagued by corruption, infighting, and power struggles. Meanwhile, economic challenges, high unemployment, mass migrations for jobs abroad, and poor infrastructure have deepened. Natural disasters such as the 2015 earthquake further exposed leadership failures. So it's no surprise then that amid this turmoil, pro-monarchy sentiments have resurfaced in Nepal. Frustrated with instability, many Nepalese long for the monarchy's stability and national identity. Protests demanding the king's return have intensified, emphasizing Nepal's Hindu heritage and the failures of the republic. In response, the government has cracked down on demonstrators, accusing royalist factions of destabilizing the country. Political instability has also strained Indo-Nepal relations. The two nations share deep historical, cultural, and religious ties, with Nepal's Hindu monarchy having close connections to India. However, shifting political leadership in Nepal has created uncertainty in bilateral relations. Now, if the monarchy returns, what would it mean for Nepal and the region? It's important to note that King Gyanendra was not an absolute ruler. The Nepalese monarchy functioned as a constitutional institution, providing stability under a parliamentary system. Now, as Nepal undergoes yet another political churn, one thing remains clear. A stable Nepal, whether a republic or a monarchy, is crucial for regional security and economic cooperation. As the people of Nepal make their choice, India stands with its neighbors. That's all for tonight. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more insights and analysis on the national security agenda.